So I'm gonna go ahead and start with my piece of steak here. This is a beautiful piece of meat. Look at that. It's a Wagyu filet mignon. I actually have to be careful with touching it because it's gonna melt so quickly in my hands. There's that perfect marbling of the fat on both sides there. This is just about the best cut of meat you can get. And I thought I'd use something special because this is a special event and a special occasion that we're working with here. So first I'm gonna go ahead and add a bunch of salt. And when you're seasoning meat, you wanna put a ton on there. You don't wanna be bashful. Just give it as much of that seasoning as you can because it's gonna lose so much of it when you actually go and put this in the pan. And then I'm gonna go ahead with my pepper and go all over the top on that. And now I'm gonna go ahead and flip this over and same exact thing. Tons and tons of seasoning. Now you want to actually just roll it right around in the salt and pepper and just get as much of that seasoning on it as you possibly can. You want to get it all along the sides of your meat too. A lot of people forget to get the sides, and that's key because think about the fact that this piece of meat doesn't have any seasoning on the inside and it's a pretty thick cut, so you want to make sure that's seasoned well. So now I'm just going to set this aside, let it come to room temperature for about 20 minutes or so before we cook it so that we can have sort of an even temperature throughout and really control the temperature on the steak. Perfect. So while that's resting, we're going to go ahead now and start the potato portion. I want to do what's called a palm puree. It's basically just a really sort of fancy, creamier, more buttery version of mashed potatoes. So for our palm puree, I'm gonna take my potatoes. These are just yellow potatoes. Yukon Gold is probably the best typically. And I'm just gonna peel the outsides off because with this, I like to keep the skin normally, but with this, it's so sort of luxurious that you don't want the skin on there. You want like that really, really smooth, just that smooth puree on the inside. Peel all the skins off of these and try to work quickly with this. Sometimes you do wanna toss your potatoes in a nice big bowl of cold ice water and it just sort of rinses off some of the starch and helps in some other ways, but I usually am just lazy and toss them right in to start cooking them. And obviously if you're doing this for more people, use a few more potatoes for this. And for the sake of time, I'm not gonna do it, but you can always toss in some nice, beautiful greens with this dish. But I'm just gonna keep it simple with the potato, the steak, and then the rosemary and stuff that we're gonna show you later. So I've got my beautiful peeled potatoes, check those out. And now I'm just gonna go ahead and cut those into cubes. And what this does is just make them cook faster. You don't have to cut them. A lot of people cook their potatoes whole, but this will just be so much quicker. Just make sure that when you cut them into cubes, they're uniform because you want it to cook evenly. Perfect, so now that we have our potato set, I'm gonna move the cutting board out of the way here. So I'm gonna put my pot of water down and then put all the potatoes right into here. I'll put my potatoes right into the water. I'm not gonna wait for it to boil, it really doesn't matter. And I'm gonna go ahead and put this up to medium heat and let these cook until I test them and they're pretty tender. So while these cook, I'll move these away and we can start on our steak. All right, so if you don't have a cast iron pan, I would recommend getting one. It's not a total must, but it's something that gives you a perfect crust every time. You can bring this out to your grill in front of your house and you can sit it on there. They're very heavy and kind of bulky and heavy bottomed, and that's actually the point. And you have to take care of them a little bit more than a regular pan, but it really only just means kind of putting some oil in there once in a while and almost baking it by itself in the oven. It's called seasoning. If you don't have a cast iron pan, the grill will work well. A stainless steel pan will work really well too, but I love a cast iron. We'll go on with our cast iron skillet, and I'm gonna turn it up to really high heat here. Now, once we have our heat up, I'm gonna actually use some ghee. It's butter. It's really, really, really good. It's basically clarified butter, which means that they've taken out the milk solids, the milk fat in here, and it has a much higher smoke point. I think it's 485. And as opposed to normal butter, that gives you a really, really great ability to give something a crust with really high heat. So I'm gonna put my ghee in here. It also melts really, really quickly. And I'll give like a nice light layer to the bottom of my cast iron, not too much. I can take it out if I need less. I don't want to go too crazy with it, but that's just about perfect. So I'll save the rest for later. And you can see it's just enough to kind of coat the bottom of the pan there. And I'm gonna let this heat up till it starts smoking. So once this starts lightly smoking, you can sort of maybe see it smoking on here. I'm gonna go ahead and put my steak right down in the middle. And you're gonna hear a nice crackling sound. And I'm gonna leave this on high heat. And now things are looking good here, so I'm gonna flip my steak over and look at my crust. Look at how perfect and beautiful and unreal that crust is. And now that we've gotten a nice crust on each side, we're gonna go ahead and take this and dump out our oil. And now this might sound crazy, but turn your heat to medium and add an entire stick of butter. Adding an entire stick, it sounds insane, but what this butter is gonna do is really toss a ton of flavor into this steak, and it's basically gonna allow us to kind of use this like hot foam from the butter to infuse other flavors and sort of finish out the remainder of the cooking process with this with this piece of meat here. I know it's a lot of butter, but trust me, it's worth it. And now we're gonna keep this down at around medium heat instead of high heat. Once this butter's a little bit melted, I'm gonna go ahead and throw in some rosemary. We also wanna add a couple cloves of garlic. And then for the rest of the time here, I'm just really trying to control my cook. I'm gonna baste it as much as I can. Go ahead and basically toss a bunch of butter all over it. And now I can move my steak around a little bit and just sort of try to make sure that it's fully cooked the rest of the way. And for a medium rare steak, you want it to be about 130 or 135 in the internal temperature. I don't often check the internal temperature, but you can if you want, if you're more comfortable that way. And once we're feeling good about the steak, we're gonna go ahead and take the steak off to rest. And when resting your steak, take all that rosemary and garlic and put that right on top of the steak so that the flavors continue to seep into your steak while it's sitting there resting. Keep in mind that your steak is gonna continue cooking even after you've taken it off of the heat. So always keep that in mind. When you read an internal temperature of maybe 131 and you're going for 134 or 135, know that it's gonna cook a few extra degrees as it sits there for 15 minutes or 20 minutes while you rest it. That can be something people forget, and they're super excited when they cook a steak perfectly, but then go to rest it and it's overdone by the time they go to eat it. So just always keep that in mind. So now we're gonna go ahead and tackle our potatoes, our palm puree. First, just give one a little taste, see how it is. But after that, we're gonna go ahead and take our potatoes and strain all the water off. Then let's dump these right into our bowl. And I really love steaming my potatoes for a little while. So I'll actually just take a clean kitchen towel, whatever I've got, and go ahead and put that right over the top. And this is gonna literally just steam them, make them so fluffy inside. And I'll do this for maybe 5 to 10 minutes. I still want them to be hot to be able to melt the butter. But this is gonna steam them and kind of keep them nice and soft and pillowy. So once they've been steamed, I'm gonna go ahead and remove this towel, and then I'll season them up with a little bit of salt. And then I'm gonna come over and take some of that delicious butter from our steak. So you know what I'll do today is opt for a slightly healthier version of palm puree. I'm gonna put a little bit of sour cream in here. And then just to give like a light tang almost to this, I'm gonna do a teeny bit of creamy buttermilk. And now I'm just gonna start kind of folding this over itself, mixing it up as much as I can to get like a really smooth consistency. And these potatoes have that amazing brown butter in there. They even have a few of the bits of rosemary from our steak. So what we're gonna do is we're gonna take our bowl, we're gonna take our palm puree, which is fairly well mixed up, but obviously it still has some ways to go before it's very fluffy. And I'm gonna put a strainer right in my bowl here and go ahead and put my potatoes into there. So just scrape those off, put them right in that bowl. Once they're in there, I can go ahead and start pushing through, and my potato will come eventually right out of the bottom in a really soft way that'll be perfect for our puree under our steak. So once we have it come through, we can scrape this puree right off and put it in our bowl. It's so ridiculously soft and creamy. It's incredible. And now we're ready to plate. Beautiful. So I'm gonna take my steak. It is so incredibly juicy. Put it down right here. I'll take off my rosemary and my garlic. And I wanna make sure that with a steak, I'm cutting against the grain. So I'm gonna go ahead with my knife here. We got a really nice crust on there. Both sides, amazing. And I'm just gonna cut, and it's a moment of truth. It's beautiful, it's so soft. You can see the perfect pink right there in the middle. And then the rest of it is a little bit cooked on the edges from that crust that we made, which is fantastic. So to start on my plate, I want that beautiful palm puree, and I'll put that right down in the middle and just sort of flatten that out so that my steak can lay right over the top of it. Then I'm gonna very gently take my steak, slide my knife right under it, and I'm gonna lay it right across. And then I can sort of do some detailing work here, make sure that everything looks the way I want it to, with the beautiful pieces sort of facing the correct directions here. Fantastic. So I got my steak nice and all laid out. Then I wanna finish things off with a little bit of flaky salt. People love their flaky salt. I'll go right over the top of my steak, some final bits of seasoning here. And then to finish, I love chives. Very simple thing to make it a little bit green, brighten it up a tad bit. And voila, that's how I make my filet mignon. I really hope all of you enjoyed this. Again, this is how I make my filet mignon. I hope you'll all give it a shot. It's really delicious, really fun to make, and super simple. Make sure you find a good spot to get high quality steak, and then just treat it well. Give it that beautiful crust, make sure it's cooked through nice and evenly, and it's delicious. I'll have to try a piece for all of you. It's a little bit fatty. You taste that rosemary in there for sure. The garlic comes through just a tiny bit, but not too much. And then that salt and pepper really just blast it with seasoning. So it's that perfect amount of seasoning. You almost can't season too much when you're seasoning a steak for a grill or a cast iron pan. And thank you so much for watching me and following along. Give this steak a shot sometime and see what you can do.